Okay, so welcome to this RTC session from the South Wales RTC in Newport. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Pullen. I am Senior Lecturer at the University of South Wales working on the ITE programme for undergrad primary school trainees. I am also an Apple Professional Learning Specialist, which means I help with the integration and strategic kind of deployment of Apple technology in schools, both across Wales and a lot broader around the UK and Europe, etc. You can contact me on Twitter. I am at Matt6453. So post this if you've got any questions that you want to ask. Feel free to ask away on Twitter. I'll do my best to get back to people. But the purpose of today's session is thinking about like what blended learning is and how we might approach it. I'm not here to tell people this is what you should do. I'm here to kind of offer some advice, some guidance, some thoughts, and some potential approaches that I've seen or read about or supported schools in deploying in their own instance. Okay, so saying that, the session outcomes for this 1 hour session, we'll just have a brief overview of what do we mean by blended learning. You no doubt are aware of the absolute range of terminology that's come out in the last 3 months around remote, blended, online, hybrid, all sorts of terminology. So let's just kind of consider what do we actually mean by blended learning. We'll take a step back to just kind of highlight some pedagogical approaches that we need to consider. For the majority of you, I'm sure that none of this is brand new stuff, but useful to just have a refresher at this point about what this means in the classroom and both online. We'll have a look at some ways that we can utilise technology to support the approach. Obviously, blended learning has a focus on the use of technology. So we'll just have a look at some approaches that might, again, stimulate some thought process in yourselves. And then we're going to finish with this idea about what does this mean for the future of teaching. We hope that this current situation is not going to continue in its current situation for the rest of time. There are lots of learnings that we could take from different approaches that might actually support different groups of learners in your classroom. And I'm sure many of you that have engaged with students during this whole process over the last few months have noticed some students have actually shone as a result of some of the approaches that you might have taken. So we'll sort of leave that as a question at the end to pose, like, what does this mean going forward? So let's just start with a little bit of a placement. Like, what do we mean by blended learning? So in various different textbooks I've looked through, everything comes back to this same point, and it is the blend of both online and classroom-based intervention. What I like about this quote that I'm sharing here is the use of the word deliberate, and that means that there is a direct combination between what you do online and what you do in the classroom. So it's not that there is online stuff for some areas of learning and then you use classroom time for something else. It's how can we join the two up so that it becomes a blended approach? How do we utilize the power of technology and the power of the teacher in person to support each other and give students new opportunities to develop themselves? So what might it look like? Here's a very, very simplistic model based on certainly us in Wales at the moment, and very much based on my son's approach, what he's been told. He's been told that he will be in school for 1 day a week for the next 3 weeks. And so this is what it looks like: 1 day in school and 4 days at home. So how does that then transpire into a blended learning approach? Well, let's consider that 1 day that he's in school could potentially be used to set up the learning over the following 4 days. You will all know as educators that the absolute critical part that you play is helping children understand things. It's not necessarily in being the sage at the front, telling them the answers to things, but it definitely is in helping them understand things. Again, from personal experience, the one thing that my son has definitely missed is the interaction with his teacher to find out if he's doing well, if he's struggling with something, and specifically that kind, nurturing approach that educators have with the students to support them to move to the next step. So that one day in school, use the time to develop the understanding and develop the application of the stuff, whatever that stuff is that you might be teaching them, be it maths, be it science, be it a foreign language, absolutely anything. How can they develop their understanding? You as the teacher have all of the tools to be able to support them with that, but it also takes that face-to-face engagement of support. And we know there's been a lot recently about the well-being of children. And I think that kind, supportive approach that educators have in the classroom is definitely the support that's needed to take that learning onto that next stage. So what does that look like for the rest of the 4 days then? Well, potentially this could be time to just develop those basic skills, to learn from the explanations and modelling, to utilise the time when the teacher doesn't necessarily need to be there, but the teacher's skills are definitely in creating the process. Like, how does the student learn the skill? And that can be done in a range of different ways. And then the child can have that moment of being stuck, the moment of having to challenge themselves to try to solve the problems for themselves. And then if they can't, you have that one day where you can kind of support in what's needed. So we can start to think about how do we structure all of that week to look a little bit differently. This is a model that I use a lot when I'm talking to my students in university and also schools that I support around the role of education technology in the classroom. And this is called the SAMA model by Ruben Puente-Jara. And sometimes you'll see this, it looks, sometimes it's presented as a ladder, sometimes it's presented as just letters on the screen. But the fundamentals are, when you start to integrate technology into any activity that you're doing, you'll go through certain different stages. And if I start at the S for substitution, the basics here are that if I start to use my iPad, for instance, to do a word processing task, and all I'm literally doing is writing on the iPad as opposed to writing on a piece of paper, that's a direct substitution. It hasn't enhanced much in anything that I've done because I'm just using the device to just do the same thing, but in a technical way. What we can start to see, though, is that because I've done that on a piece of technology, there are some functional improvements by doing it in that way. So by doing it on technology, I have a spell checker built in, which means if I'm bad at spelling, I've instantly just gained access to being able to spell check all my work. That can make a huge improvement for some people. So it's not to be sniffed at because it's definitely a functional change. It does enhance somewhat what I'm doing, but it hasn't really changed what I do. It's still writing on a piece of paper. So that's augmentation. If we then start to move to the M and the R, the modification and the redefinition, at this level, we're starting to see some sort of transformational difference. And that's really what we're going through at the moment with blended learning, online learning, remote learning. We're starting to see how technology changes things in a completely different way. So for instance, we've modified some tasks that we're doing at the moment. Lots of schools are starting to use Google Classroom or Teams or Seesaw to actually start to think about, how do I interact with my students? How do I set them an activity? In the past, it used to be that I would stand at the front of the class and I might put something on the board, and then students might access that in person, and then they would write in their books, and I'd collect the books at the end of the lesson. When we're using technology at the moment, people are putting the work on an online platform, be it Seesaw, whatever it is. There'll be some explanation on there, sometimes through the use of video, which has its own modification and transformational approaches. And the students then create their work in a slightly different way and share that back to the teacher, who then uses feedback in a slightly different way. Yes, it might still be verbal, but it's probably recorded verbal. And not always is the teacher going to phone up the child and give them, instant verbal feedback in that way. So it's recorded in some way. So we've started to modify things. If we move down to the redefinition, this is kind of the pinnacle, and this is potentially where we're looking at with blended learning. Because what we're able to do here is completely redefine what we're doing. So let's imagine that we set that student the task. We create a video as the teacher to give them the input, and then we ask the student to try out some of those activities to develop the skill, to refine their skill. And then we ask them to do something with that knowledge. Let's actually turn this into an authentic learning experience where we ask them to apply it in a new way. I know for one, with my son's school and the work that he's been sent home, he's been going outside, he's been exploring the world around him, he's been taking photos of things, he's used those photos to create videos. He then creates something much bigger than just an answer to a question. He can actually create something which is a lot more provocative. He can create something which actually might solve a problem in his local area. So he's actually starting to identify where the learning fits with his world and where he lives and what he's interested in. So we can start to see there that what we're using technology for completely redefines the learning opportunities for the students. Now, the danger in a model like this is it looks like a stepped approach, and it's as if everything you do should move directly to the redefinition level, and that's not the idea. Substitution is absolutely valid. It's an absolutely valid. If I want to take notes on my iPad as opposed to taking notes on a piece of paper, even if that functional change is minor, it's still a functional change. It still cuts down on paper. It still means that I've got a range of coloured tools rather than having just one pen at my disposal. It also allows me to be able to share those notes with other people. And if you stay at that substitution level for those things, there is still an added benefit to it. But what it's not saying is that I then should start to think, well, I take my notes on an iPad, so now I should start to think about what other functional improvements, and then I should start to modify those. And now I'm going to redefine note-taking altogether. For some people, that might be the process. For one, I sketchnote. I draw all over my notes and do it in a completely different way. I've redefined how I take notes in a technological way. But for others, just simply substituting paper for an iPad might just be the difference between losing your notepad and not losing your iPad. So that's the SAMR model. Lots more information about it, and I'm not going to go into full details. This isn't a lecture about pedagogy. This is to think about the blended learning approach. But in saying that, blended learning should fit into this bottom section where we're starting to think about transformation. What do we have the opportunity to do now that we didn't have necessarily in a traditional teaching model? When all the students were in front of us from 9 until 3 o'clock, in a structured curriculum timetable, what were we not able to do that we can possibly do now? How can we utilize the power of technology to allow our students to personalize their learning for themselves and challenge themselves? And not only that, if we always relied on students writing things down in books before, but we know some students had difficulties accessing that, how does technology allow us to be able to utilize what they really do know about something and share it to us in a slightly different way? That brings me on to the next bit of pedagogy. Again, this is not going to be new to anybody. Bloom's taxonomy is one of the main taxonomies that we'll talk about, certainly when we're discussing teacher education. I remember it when I was going through my own teacher training in the past. But the key thing here is if we look at the pinnacle of this pyramid, where we know most impact is had on learning, we're looking at creation. So the second thing to consider when we're looking at blended learning approaches, how are we integrating this idea of creation? Because that is where the evidence suggests students will show the biggest rate of understanding. Because if we look at the very bottom, unfortunately, that's our exam system. We test them by seeing what they can remember. If you have a good memory, you remember a lot, you pass the test. But it's not the deepest level. It's not something which is going to have an impact later on. Yet we know from research that if we create something, and that's not just by saying, let's just make a nice pretty picture, but if we create something with the learning, if we can do something with it, if we can take our learning and apply it in a different way and use it to potentially teach somebody else or create an original piece of work with that learning, that's going to demonstrate that we have understood those things in a lot deeper fashion. So when we're considering this blended learning approach, are there opportunities where we can take the learning that we share with our students, have them go through these different levels of being able to remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, but ultimately, where are we fitting in with this creation? When we're asking people to do the work, what do they do as a result of it? Are we happy that the answer to a test is the end result? Or do we want to see where they would go next with this? So again, we'll kind of draw back to this as we look through some of the examples within the session. But we definitely need to keep abreast of this idea around creation. Here's a statistic from linked to that creativity element. 81% of teachers say that lesson plans that make transformative use of technology are better for students to connect their learning to the real world. And for those educators in Wales, we know that one of our guiding principles is that our learning is authentic, and we're trying to get our students to understand it in a real life context. And we've just seen that Sama will talk to us about this idea of let's use technology in a transformative way. What we need to do is move away from the idea that we just use technology as a substitution for doing something in a book. So yes, we've done a piece of work around science. The substitution might be let's make a PowerPoint presentation or let's make a poster. And yes, there's an element of creativity there, but it's not really transformative. Okay. If we made a poster that came to life when you scanned it with augmented reality, that might be more transformative, might be more engaging, might teach students more skills. That's just one example, but it could be lots of different ways. But we know that the evidence, again, is saying that we need to think about our creative use of technology and not just the role of technology in the classroom as it has traditionally been used. This is a great book I've been reading over the last few months whilst we've been in lockdown, and I've had more time to do this. This is a book called Drive by Daniel Pink. And one of the elements in this talks about motivation. It talks about what motivates us to do things, and the idea that as human beings, we've moved from this idea of we are motivated by survival, which is I need to eat, so I need to go, kill an animal to eat it. That's my motivation. To the second motivation, which is why am I doing something for somebody else? So reward and punishment. Why do I not do something bad? Because I'm going to get punished. Why do I do something that's good? Because I'm going to get rewarded. To ultimately this kind of idea around what motivates us to do things where it's not an element of punishment, where it's not an element of reward. And the reason that this resonates with me quite a lot at the moment is, as many of you will have seen, and potentially in your own classes, but definitely through engaging in social media, there are some students that have really shone at a time when they're educating at home. Now, some of that, yes, might be parents putting a lot of pressure on them in some way to do things. But there's also an element of how many children do you know that when they leave school go home and learn something anyway? Not because they're going to pass an exam, but they just want to learn something new. I've seen so many examples of children cooking more at home, or starting to sew, or doing things that has no innate reward. They're not potentially getting paid for it. They're not getting grades for it. They're doing it for the love of it. And this comes down to this idea of autonomy and choice. And in the book, it talks about this idea that the new motivation that we've potentially overlooked for a long period of time is this idea about we want to learn, we want to be autonomous in that learning, which means that we need to have an element of choice. And when we provide learners with choice, or provide anyone with choice, your drive is liberated, and you can achieve an awful lot more. Because when we take away choice, you end up working for the predetermined goals that are set in front of you. So I would urge people to take a look at this. You don't need to get the book. In general, there are some really good overviews of this if you just search on Google. But it's a really, really interesting read when you start to think about the impact of COVID-19 on students, and the ones that have developed more because they've had freedom. If we drill down to that, if we look at what autonomy looks like and how this can support students in the classroom, there are 4 T's around autonomy. The first one is task. So what it is we're asking the students to do. Again, traditionally, it's predetermined by the teacher. This is what we're all going to do. I want you to create a presentation based on this. It's going to have these facts in it. Off you go. There's no choice. There might be some choice in the color that you use or the font that you use, but fundamentally, we're all going to make exactly the same presentation. I know that in higher education, we can be guilty of this as well. We set a question, they all answer the same question. As lecturers, we get bored marking the same assignment 30 times because they've told us all the same thing. But ultimately, we asked them to tell us all the same thing because we didn't give them any choice really in the question in the first place. The second one then being time, and this is something which has massively come out at the moment. There are students which have sat with a very synchronous process in their schools. There are some schools that have religiously said, 9 till 10 is going to be our maths time. We'll have a live video stream. You tune in, the teacher will teach live, then take a break. There'll be another lesson then from 11 till 12 that might be on English. Then you take a break. Then after lunch, we're going to do something. And then there are other schools where it's been the start of the day. Here's some activities. We know that you might not be able to do them all at the same time. So choose when you want to do it. Now, there is no model at the moment which is saying one is better than the other. Some students, as you will probably see yourself, need the structure and they need that guidance that I work at this specific time. And other students like the freedom to say, well, I'm going to get it done, but I don't work very well in the morning and I'm actually going to do a little bit after lunch. What I want to do is run around for a little bit first, get rid of some of my excess energy, and then I'll focus more later on. So again, that's another thing to think about. And again, I'm not here to tell you what is right or wrong. I'm just kind of pointing out to people what the opportunities are if we start to reimagine what education can look like. The third T then is technique. How do you do it? And this is something that I suppose, being an Apple professional learning specialist, I get called on to a lot in schools, is that if we're not going to ask students to write things down in books all the time, what are the alternatives? And how does that look in the classroom? So, for example, students that make videos as a result of their learning, students that can make a lovely keynote animation out of the things that they're doing, students that make podcasts. And the reason why that is important is because when you're not constrained by the limits of your ability, i.e., if you struggle to write, just because you're left-handed. So again, my son's left-handed, so he struggles to write sometimes. His handwriting's not as neat as it could be, so therefore he gets put off by writing. If I take away that issue, all of a sudden now, there is no barrier to what he can tell me about scientific facts or historical facts or whatever it might be, because I've taken away that problem. Now, if handwriting is an issue, that just gets taught somewhere else. But if I'm asking him to handwrite everything, then actually that's a barrier to his learning straight away. So when you give choice to students in terms of the technique, you can then start to see successes in different areas that you might not have noticed before because of a barrier that was in place. If we liken this to our EAL learners, the same applies there. Students that might be perfectly able to explain something, one, in their native language, two, by just verbally explaining it, but if they're asked to write it down, we've added in another barrier of do you know how to spell those words. So now we've put in probably 2 or 3 barriers before we've actually assessed any of the actual learning about the topic. So technique, really, really important. And again, I'm sure people have got lots and lots of examples of the things that they've seen their students create in a variety of ways. And again, watching on Twitter, I've seen so many fantastic examples from schools where they've shared videos that students have created, photo collages of things students have done, lots and lots. The final one is team. Okay, so who do you work with? And this is an important one because this links to other ideals that we talk about in education, Vygotsky's zones of proximal development, for example. The fact that we can learn so much from other people. One thing that I've certainly learned over the last 3 months is my team does not need to be limited by the people I directly work with. Last week alone, I was at a conference which was held in Mississippi, and I was interacting with 2,000 people from around the world in different time zones of different languages. And there's something in that which develops you as an individual because you're access to a diverse population of educators. So let's think about that in the classroom. As we know, we can't all be experts in everything. So when we stand in front of our students and teach, we sometimes feel that we should be the experts in everything. What we've learned, I suppose, from the last 3 months is that by utilizing technology, we have access to an awful lot more experts. If I don't know how to explain algebra to a 10-year-old, then I'm sure I could find a video somewhere on the internet which explains it a lot better than I do. And then my role as the educator is to support the understanding of that. So now you've developed that team. But what you also do is you allow your students to choose the team for themselves as well. Who would I like to work with on this? We know that Google and OneDrive offer us fantastic opportunities to collaborate way beyond the classroom experience. How about collaborating with students in another part of the world based on a geography topic when you're looking at climate change? Let's actually go to a part of the world that's being hit by climate change a lot more than we are in Wales. All of a sudden now those students have a completely different outlook on what the impact of climate change is from first-hand examples, rather than looking at it from a secondary point of view of going online and or reading a book about climate change. So they're the 4 Ts of autonomy. Again, really, really useful to consider when we're thinking about blended learning and the opportunities that it allows us to not just recreate what we did in the classroom and merge it between a bit of classroom teaching and an online activity, but to actually think what that could look like going forward. So let's consider.
Interesting question.
Siri agreeing with me. Let's have a look at what that looks like then from a point of view where we look at our 1 day and 4 days. Let's imagine that we flip the model completely. And this is just one example of how we might use video to do this. So I used the example a moment ago about making a video to explain a process. Now, this could be made by the teacher themselves, which I think is a really useful tool, certainly for younger learners, because they need that interaction, or at least to hear the voice or see the face of their teacher from a wellbeing point of view. But the teacher makes the video to explain the process. So let's take maths, for example. If I want to teach a child how to balance equations, or I want to teach a child what ratio means, I make a video which explains to them how to do this. I then ask the students in the time away from me to start to use that information to answer some questions, to develop their basic skills. Do I understand what the teacher has shown me? And here are the questions that I need to answer. Can I practice that skill? So we're just going through the process of practicing it. But then what we can do is, once they've practiced it, ask them to apply it. Okay, so in your world, what might this look like? And you can pose kind of questions, very much problem-solving questions, to help them develop their understanding. And that can take time throughout the week, and obviously that's just one example of learning that would need to take place across those 4 days whilst the students are at home. And then what do we do on that 1 day when the teacher is back in the equation live? So we're back in the school. Well, the teacher then has the power and the skills and the tools to help that student unpick the learning, to work out where the problems are, where the misconceptions are, and to understand what next steps to take. So rather than using that teacher's time to go through everything that could be created online, that could be pre-made, we actually use the teacher's skills to actually help support the learners to take the next step. Where do we go as a result of this? For the students that might struggle, it might be that I personalise their learning to give them some additional support, to ask them, which areas of that ratio issue do they not understand, and I can support them. For students that really grasp it, I can push them a lot further. And this is where personalisation of learning comes in, because now I can differentiate based on what I actually know they're able to do, rather than predetermining the differentiation based on what I think they're going to be able to do. So again, there's opportunities here to start to transform what that might look like in the classroom. Here's kind of another example, and this is if you flip all of that back to the front, we could start in the classroom. So again, it doesn't matter where that classroom session sits, but just imagine it's a 5-day sequence. So we start in the classroom, and we start with an inquiry-based approach. So rather than teaching the children the skills, we teach them why they might need the skills. So you start with an inquiry, what it is what we want to find out. We develop a student's passion about that thing, and then we provide them with the tools to be able to answer the questions. So for instance, in this case, we might be talking to them about recycling as an issue. And we actually spend the time in the class to develop that passion, to develop the issues that surround it. We then know that they're potentially going to have questions about X, Y, or Z. So I'm going to fill those gaps in as part of a blended learning approach by creating videos which will support them when they're not with me. The facts, the processes type things. And then I ask the students to then go away and solve a problem, apply it to a situation, think about their own area that they live in, to apply the facts that we might have talked about in school to see if they can solve something within their own context of where they live. What we're now doing is we're starting to get the students to master the skills that they have, to apply them in a way that makes sense to them. My best example I usually talk to my learners and schools that I work with here is is usually a maths-based one. And students sometimes don't understand why they need to learn something until it becomes a case that they apply it. And I've seen so many great examples recently online where teachers, parents, have been doing cooking with their children. And all of a sudden, the children start to understand why you need to understand measurements and why you need to understand multiplication, because we're going to make, this recipe, we're going to make it for 4 people instead of 2 people. So how much do we have to, multiply the things, all the ingredients by? When you start with the purpose as to why we need to do something, as opposed to start with the skill, for some learners, that can change the engagement with it. You must all be able to think of a student who just does not switch on because you're teaching them something that they don't feel is relevant to them. So with blended learning approaches, there's an opportunity to flip all of that and start with the purpose, start with why you might need to know something, and then support them, because we have the power of technology to give them the process type things. So we start with purpose, we then move to process, which can be pre-recorded, and then we allow students to apply that and challenge themselves in their own time. Again, I'm not here to say that this is the model. I'm here to say that these are some things to think about. And based on the fact that we're using technology, these are things that I've seen schools do really, really well. And we'll come to that a bit later. But fundamentally, the idea is that this doesn't need to be a model where you're in school one day and out of school for 4 days. This is a model where you could be in school 5 days a week, but the same process applies. We can use blended learning in a completely different way in the classroom as well, where students have access to things via technology, which means they don't always have to ask the teacher for that help. And usually it's the teacher repeating themselves all of the time. Okay, so, oops, gone too far. Let's go back one. So, if we think about it in this way, how much extra time might you gain if you take learning beyond that school day? If you actually utilise the fact that students might have a passion for something and want to develop the mastery in their own time, as they do anyway. The amount of times that I've seen my son come home and go onto YouTube and watch videos on how to draw, how to cook, how to make something, it's the passion is there for students to want to learn. So let's allow that learning to go beyond what the traditional classroom looks like of 9 till 3, Monday to Friday, because learning is not 9 till 3, Monday to Friday. Learning is forever. So what can technology do to ensure the continuation of learning so that students realise that whether I'm in school or not, the time of learning is not between 9 and 3. So how can we do that? So I'm going to move on to a few examples now, just to kind of set the scene of some of the possibilities. Some of these are examples that I've created for my own son. Some are examples that I've created for schools that I've worked with, but just opportunities to sort of see how the technology can support you here. The main emphasis here is about the making of videos. I think you'll all have seen and all have taken part in the idea that if you can make a video which shows a process to a learner, it's replicating what you did in the classroom, the times that you would stand at the front and you would show an example. The benefit of making a video is how many times have you had to repeat yourself to a learner in a classroom. So this again transcends whether or not this is classroom-based or home-based. If we're making a video, I put the same amount of effort into making a video as if I explain it live, but because it's a recorded video, that student can replay that video as many times as they need to check understanding, which then frees up the teacher to not have to repeat themselves, giving them time to apply themselves in a different way. We'll take a look at how we can create some documents which can support students in choice. We'll think about how they can develop their understanding through creativity. So how does the technology allow them to not just answer questions, but do something with that new knowledge? And we'll think about how teachers' contact time can change the personalization of learning when you're face-to-face with that student, because you'll have a bigger picture of what things they struggled with, as opposed to predetermining the things that you think they might struggle with. So I'm going to jump out of the presentation just for a second and just jump into some examples. This first example is using a numbers document. An example here, this was specifically for my son who was struggling with doing some algebra, so I thought I'd create a little document for him. What we've done here is on page 1, if you're not familiar with numbers is kind of Apple's equivalent to Excel spreadsheets. But I've taken the spreadsheet idea of having tabs along the top or along the bottom, wherever they might be on the program you're using, deleted everything out of it and using it as a template to guide learning. So in the introduction, I've created a video here that the student, or in this case my son, can play. And as he plays the video, it's just going to talk through how you do an approach in algebra. I've then sort of set on this part here, before you even go any further, what are your possible misconceptions? What do you think you know after watching the video? What do you think you might struggle with? So I'm asking the student, before they start doing anything, to engage in a bit of self-reflection. Is this something you think, yeah, that makes sense, I think I can get on with this, or I think I'm going to struggle? The reason for that is because up here, I've set 3 different levels of challenge. And I know lots of educators are starting to do this. Rather than telling the student you are a level 5 or a level 4, whatever, I just say, look, we're going to base this on the chili challenge, which is a popular thing that's gone around social media for the last 10 or so years. Choose your level. And this is that choice element that we talked about earlier on in terms of autonomy. If you think this is something you're going to struggle with, start with the 1 chili. And in the 1 chili challenge, all I've done in here is I've put some simple activities that they would do. And again, this is based on what my son's been doing at the moment. But you get the idea. This is easy and then slightly harder and slightly harder again as you move up the challenges. And there's also space on screen here to do some working out. So again, using the power of mobile technology in this. In this case, I have access to a stylus. I'm doing this on an iPad, which means I have access to the drawing tools. So the questions are over here. I can use this side to actually, use the framework to support what I'm doing. So I know the question is 2 plus A is 4. I remember back from the video, and if I can't remember, I can go back to the video and play it again. I remember from the video we talked about balancing things. So I know that if 2 plus A is 4, what do I need to do to work this out? And if I take the 2 off this side, then that's going to unbalance this, etc., etc. Students can sort of play around with this, and they can put down their answers, and that's the basics of it, right? So I am substituting their paper, but the functional improvement is the fact that they can just simply go back to the video that the teacher's provided. So if they're not sure on something, and bearing in mind that if this is home learning activity time, the teacher isn't there to repeat themselves, so therefore they can watch the video again. And I've also enhanced some of it by giving them the option to be able to draw over the screen if they need to add in their thoughts, their ideas, and choose their levels. So again, this is just a slightly more difficult activity. That's not where we end though, and that might be where some learning would end traditionally. The final thing that I'm actually asking them to do is add in their own version of the video. And this is something that my son's been doing quite a lot recently, and we've seen real improvements with his maths because he's engaged in this in a slightly different way. So in this section here, they would add in their own version. How would they explain algebra to somebody else? So that's the basic setup. I'll show that in a slightly different way. Now this is one that we're actually using at the moment. I've checked with his permission to be able to show this. So this is what he's currently working on, which is squared numbers and cube numbers. And it looks very similar. It's a little bit more simplistic because I'm working. So I tried to put some support materials for him in the morning based on what his school has asked him to do. And then he accesses it throughout the day, but the video is there, so he doesn't have to keep knocking on the door to ask me for things. He can just access the video that I've created for him. So once this quickly loads up, it's got videos in it, so it's a bit big. So here's the video that I've created for him. So in the top left, this is going to play through. You won't be able to hear the audio because I haven't set it up to play, but you see that the video plays through with my explanation of what he needs to do. He watches the video, and then in the bottom left corner, this is his version of that video based on the maths that he was doing. So if I just make that a little bit bigger, bring it to the front. So he's just done a screen recording on his iPad. He's got the questions on the right-hand side that he's been asked to do. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see in a second, he starts to actually explain this. So in a way that works for him, he explains it to me. Now, the benefit of that is, one, as his parent, I can see that he understands it. But two, if he shares this back to his teacher, There's a lot more information in this video about what his misconceptions might or might not be than if he just put the answer. So again, we're really transforming what the learning looks like. And this, regardless of whether we're doing blended learning, is a way that technology can transform things. It just means that within a blended learning environment, it's something that it's one of the tools that we're probably going to have to use more than not. So that just goes there as an example, and the whole process kind of gets repeated. So on this one, again, cubing numbers, teacher video or my video has gone in here. His response video goes in here. And then this is just a space if he feels he needs to use it to do anything. So that's maths as an example. Next example to quickly show you, this is specifically based on what he's been doing at school at the moment. They've set him some extended learning tasks that he can do at home. It usually comes as one sheet with some activities on it. Being the technology guy that I am, I wanted to enhance it in some way, and knowing that he engages in the use of technology in a slightly different way to if I just asked him to write his answers down in a book. We just created a book which goes through the different activities. So I've created this. It's just a template. It looks fancy, but it's just the power of the iPad really for making things look nice. These are the activities that the school gave him at the top. I've just copied them across. I haven't edited them in any way. And I've given him a space to design, create, to express himself in a way that works for him. Now, if he wants to add text into here, he can tap on it and just start to add in text. That's absolutely fine. But because this is a mobile device, he can also add in photos. So he could draw something on a piece of paper manually, not having to worry too much about technological, drawing. Just draw it on paper and add a photo in. He could record her voice, although for this one it is draw a cartoon strip, so you'd assume that they do draw. But he could record some audio and give some more context to what he's doing. He could draw directly on here. So again, he could draw on paper, he can draw on the iPad, he can record his voice, he can take photos, etc. There's so many other ways that he can express himself. And that makes more sense as you go through. So with this one, for example, this was a language literacy and communication task where it was really a debate. So here's the provocation, watch this video, here's the link. And then what are the positives and what are the negatives? Now, a student might write directly on the screen. So the positives might be see animals in real life. And then you might put some of the negatives, but you know what? I can't think of how to spell certain things. So rather than writing, I'm going to go to record audio. Some of the negatives might be that those animals would live in really, really big areas. And in a zoo, they're going to have a really confined area, which is going to take away their freedom. Tap stop, tap insert, and stick that on this side. So now all of a sudden, I'm not asking them to write if they're struggling to write, because actually nowhere over here does the task ask about, can you write all of the ways that this is good or bad? It doesn't say that. It just asks me to share my thoughts. And for some students, just being able to talk is going to be really, really beneficial. Some might like to handwrite it. Some might want to put text in there. You might want to enhance it by creating a video. You might want to just put pictures in there of animals that you think look sad, whatever it might be. But you've changed the way that students can access the learning in a different way. And the whole book goes through the same process. This one here, again, giving choice. The idea was to create a newspaper report. So this side, here's a digital version, but this side, if you just want to take a piece of paper and do it with pens and pencils and write it, great. But you know what? It'd be nice to let's collect it all in one place so that we can share that with our teacher later in a nice, simple way. So you would just add your image here. This one, if you're working with primary school level students, you'll know that lots of schools are doing like times table rock scars, or in this case, a spelling shed. My son is not very good at remembering that he needs to do this on a regular basis. So this is just a simple kind of support activity where he just needs to put a tick in the box to say that he's done it each day. So just simple thing to develop independence, but a little bit of guided independence. Have you ticked all of the boxes each day? And yes, of course, children could just put a tick on each one. It doesn't mean they've actually done it. But what we're trying to do is give them some scaffolding. The book goes through lots and lots of different things. This one, then they did an online sports day. So the idea here is, take some photos of yourself doing it, add in your score. It's a nice memento for you to keep, but also, take a picture of that page and share it to your teacher afterwards to show all the things you did. The key thing is that we want students to be able to see their own progress over time. So rather than putting it into a book, which is very two-dimensional, yes, you could take photos and put them in books, but that takes time and is restrictive. So how does technology support that student in a slightly different way? Last example to just quickly go through is this one. This one actually wasn't made with coronavirus in mind at all. This was made nearly a year ago now with a school that just wanted to look at how they were utilising technology in a different way. And I've shared this numerous times before. This is an 8-week scheme of work for plants for Year 2 students. And the idea here is to give students autonomy in how they approach things. Traditionally, this first activity was for students to go and find plants in their local surroundings in the school playing grounds. They would use a clipboard, they would take a piece of paper and a pen, and they would go out and write down what they found, which kind of doesn't really marry up to, well, how do I know they found it? Because I'm asking them to write about something, which is actually a visual activity. So what we did was the technology actually asked them to go and take photos of these things, using these as a guide. So these aren't pictures of the plants that were in their field, but they are a representation of what the plants might look like. So they can use this as their support. They then go and find them, take photos of them. They then can start to classify them. So this was the next step. So once we found those pictures, can we classify whether they're deciduous or evergreen? So a lot more interactive. In the case of this, they would just move the pictures from one side to the other. So again, an interactive kind of approach. This one is a search. So can you find some examples online? Then we're asking them to bring in their own seeds, talk about their seeds. And then this one again is that element of choice, of autonomy. What does your seed needs to grow? So we're just going to kind of add this, kind of mix and match, put the icons in. But then ultimately what I want to do here is I want to know why they think that. So in this section here, I want the students to be able to tell me why. So I would ask them to tap on the plus and tap on their record audio, and the same as before, start to record. I think my plant needs sunlight in order to grow. I've heard that singing to plants can help them grow, and I think they need some form of food. And they would just insert that, and then that would go into their journal as another example of their understanding. And again, children were probably going to be more likely to express themselves. And I say children, I know adults that are more likely to express themselves verbally than if I asked them to write everything down. So the whole book goes through that process. Again, there's lots of choice in this. There's elements where we can ask them to draw things, again, using the power of the technology. But what we want to do all the time is make things accessible. So I'm going to move back to this and think about the idea of accessibility. How do I allow students to be able to access this learning if the teacher is not there? Well, one thing that they can do on this device, if I select the text because I can't read it, I can tap on speak. Now you can't hear it, but you can see the highlighted text going across the screen. It's allowing the student, it is reading it to me, I just can't play this through the WebEx, but it allows the students to be able to engage in the words. So I can see the words, but I might not be able to read them, but now I can hear the words as well. And if I understand spoken English, I can access this book. So again, a really, really simple way to be able to access learning in a slightly different way for our students if they are working remotely. Now, just to quickly highlight where this is, and there's not time to go into the full accessibility suite, but this sits across the whole device. This is not an app that allows you to do it. I don't go into a specific app and turn on a setting. I turn the setting on for the device in general. So on my device, on my iPad, I would tap on accessibility on the left, tap on spoken content, and at the top here, I've turned speak selection on. I can then choose to highlight that content, and in my instance, I've chosen it to speak and highlight the specific word as it's being spoken. And then that means no matter what site I'm on, so if I go to, a BBC site now, find something that isn't related to coronavirus, good luck. If I choose the text, you'll see again, I get that option to speak. So it's on absolutely any website. If I can select the text, I can have it speak to me. So that's really useful. Okay, so let's focus on something else then. We talked about creating video as being something that's really, really powerful for the students. So I'm going to have a look at a tool which is really useful for this, and that is Clips. So within Clips, what this enables me to do, is to create a video which can support the students in a slightly different way. Now, the power of Clips is that when I record the video, I can also record my voice. So if I turn on this little icon, which is a speech bubble to the left of the record button, this gives me captioning or live titles, which means when I record my voice, it's going to record what I'm saying as well. So instantly, I'm creating a closed caption video when students that might struggle with understanding spoken English can read it. It might be a student that's deaf. What I've done straight away is made things accessible. And you can see it's pretty quick in picking up those words and putting it on video. Now, in this case, I've created an example of this, and I'll show this again in a second as well. This is another maths example. I've done a screen recording of me showing a student how to do something in maths, and then I've added my explanation over the top. So again, you can't hear the audio coming through, but you can see that I have recorded my voice over the top. I've allowed it to highlight the text as I'm speaking. The visuals are on the video, the audio is playing through, and the text on the screen marries up to the audio at exactly the same time, hence why the yellow icon shows up. So that's just another really, really quick example of how educators can use the power of the technology in order to support the learners in structuring things. So making a video, such as in Clips, allows me to record myself to say, hi, welcome to this lesson. I then go into something like notes. So if I jump into notes, this is that example that I was using before. I can use my pencil in here to tap on the screen and give an example. And then I can record this. So this icon here on the screen is recording. I'm currently sharing my screen, so I can't show you what this looks like. But if I tap on this, it would give me the option to screen record, which means everything that I show you here becomes a video, which is exactly what I just showed you in Clips. It takes me the length of time to explain it once to make the video, so I'm not taking up any more teacher time. And then I can share that video that students can play 1,000,000 times. Okay, I can share that through Seesaw or Teams or Google Classroom or whatever it might be for students to be able to access. So again, simplicity of making that video in the first place. In this example, that's exactly what is done here. If I again make this bigger, you'll see that the process is this is a notes page. I'm recording the screen, which is this little red icon up here, and you can see everything that I've shared as an example is recorded, including my voice, even though you can't hear it via the example. And then that's one video made that a student can watch as many times as they need to watch in order for them to understand the process of something, saving again that teacher time to help them understand things as opposed to just showing them the process. Okay, so let's jump back to the presentation, again conscious of time. The role of technology in what we've looked at here is to provide access to learning for all learners. So even though you will teach something in one way, students sometimes struggle to understand those things in the first instance. So having a video allows them to access it multiple times. Allowing students to express themselves through creativity. We've said that that's the pinnacle of that Bloom's taxonomy, to be creative. So how does technology allow them to be creative in various ways? Through choice of drawing, video, audio, or text. The video that we said can be played as often as learners need. So therefore, if a student didn't understand things the first time, they can have multiple times to try and understand that again. And the mobile nature of the device allows them to apply it in the real world. So we're not asking them to sit at a desk with a keyboard. We're saying, take the device and go and explore the world around you and document your learning whilst it's taking place in real time. Record your voice, take photos, make a video, whatever it might be. And then, yes, you might go back into the classroom or back into an office space to actually make sense of it, but you've got something to refer to as well. And then obviously we know with coronavirus happening and classrooms and spacing, people using the outdoor space is going to be absolutely necessity at the moment of how can we utilize the outdoor learning space to create that kind of safe environment for our students. These are just some questions I'm going to pose. They're not necessarily things that I'm going to answer at this point, but things to pose. How might this approach support learners when they're actually in the classroom as well? We talked about the power of video and teacher not having to repeat themselves and students having access to those things. How does it meet the needs of the new curriculum and the principles? So thinking about creativity, thinking about students being independent and all of those things, and well-being. How does the role of technology support us in that? What does this imply for schools and investment in technology? Do we know what students have at home? Do we know what we have in school? Have we utilised technology as a learning and teaching tool, or have we used it as an ICT tool to meet the needs of the curriculum? Or are we thinking about its needs, its role in terms of meeting the needs of learners? And then finally, kind of linked to that one, do we know what access all of our learners have at home? Have we asked the parents, do you have access to the internet? Have we asked, do you have tools such as an iPad or a laptop or a computer at home to know whether these things can be possible? And if they are, then maybe we can do more of it. And if they're not, how do we access the funding that's available at the moment for schools to be able to provide for students that might not have access to those things? That kind of leads me on to just kind of the closing bit, and then I will open up for Q&A, and I've had one question in which I will answer in just a second. XMA are one reseller that is on the framework in Wales. So for those of you on the call that might have an awareness of this, just to point out that Caerphilly has done a central procurement piece in Wales. All schools are being asked at the moment to contact their local authorities to say what equipment they feel they need as part of the £27 million which is available for EdTech through Welsh Government at the moment. XMA are on that framework. They are an Apple registered education specialist, and they will help you not only with the procurement of the devices, but also the professional learning that surrounds that, from strategic deployment to how you might use it. For example, I am a professional learning specialist. There are opportunities to link with the likes of me, and there are many of us around the country that can support with how do you get the most out of this technology. This is the range of professional learning that you can engage with, not simply just buying the devices. There are things from leadership support to technical advice, support with students, getting students to understand how they can use these tools, all the way through to community support and how you can support parents in their understanding of what the technology looks like at home as well as in school. And then from a teacher specific point of view, lots and lots of ways that we can develop the teachers, from foundations, getting used to using the technology, to specific uses in subject areas that meet the needs of the students, to more innovative kind of approaches, which is that transformational element. Like, what does the technology do that you couldn't do before? How can you utilize your environment in a different way? How does learning look when you don't have to rely too much on a 9 to 3 setup? Apple at the moment are running some education online series as well. So if you are interested in finding out like some case studies and success stories of how schools have rolled out technology and specifically iPad, you can roll onto these. They're all free. I think there's one tomorrow, but if you scan that QR code, you can find those. And I'll put some links in the chat in a second that will help with that as well. But I would advise, it's a great place to go to get some free advice from the people that know what they're talking about. And then finally, the one question that I had through the chat window was, have I got a guide on how to put things like this together? Yes. I have busily been creating over the last few months my own YouTube channel. And within that YouTube channel, I have put lots and lots of links to videos that you can access. So if I just jump into this now, these are all videos showing you how to do those things. So for specifically the numbers idea that I shared with you before, that's by here, and that's going to give you access to how I put together that numbers thing, how to make videos in clips, how to use Keynote, etc. There's kind of a whole host of videos in here that you can use just to support you in your own understanding of things. And that's it from me. I did want to allow some time now. We're kind of just on the hour mark. I did want to allow some time if people had any questions. If you don't have any questions, then I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining in. Like I said, you can contact me on Twitter. If I just jump back to this page. Just got my Twitter handle, so Matt6453 on Twitter. If you've got any additional questions you'd like to reach out for, I'm more than happy to help you with anything you might have some questions about. Okay, so questions coming. Can I share the slide after the XMA one? Yeah, 1 second. So I'm assuming this is the one people meant. So this is the different levels of professional learning that you can engage with. Excellent. Thanks for joining in. Best wishes to someone from Switzerland. There we go. So our international impact on this. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, would have been helpful 4 months ago. Yeah, sorry, I should have done this sooner. But hopefully it's of use now. Yes, this webinar has been recorded, so I will put this on my YouTube later, so you'll be able to access it there. Same question from Laura. Yeah, I've got this. This will be recorded, so please do share around your colleagues, etc., or senior leadership teams if that's going to be of use. Okay, great question. How important is it to decide on a single platform? We currently have Classroom and Teams, etc. It depends on like the platform you're thinking about. So this comes up quite a lot about the whole Apple ecosystem and Microsoft ecosystem. If I show you here, this is Microsoft on an iPad. All of these tools exist on an iPad. Because Office 365 is a cloud-based tool, it works just as well on an iPad that it does on a desktop computer because I'm accessing it. There are some functional changes, but there are also some functional benefits to doing it on an iPad, i.e. you have a built-in camera and microphone and you're mobile. So that's all the Microsoft tools, and there are more. And then equally, if you're a Google school, these are all the Google tools that you will use. So when people say Chromebook or iPad, well, the argument is an iPad is a Chromebook because I have access to all of the Chromebook tools on my iPad. So kind of developing that question, I think you need to decide on a platform, be it Microsoft or Google or Apple's own iCloud platform, because your students need to get used to a way of working. And if some students with some teachers are using Google Classroom to submit their work, and then they go to the next class and they're using Teams, that gets quite confusing and can disengage learners. How they create the work, though, do you need to specify that to them? You might build the skills up to them to show them, how do I use Keynote? How do I use PowerPoint? How do I use Clips, iMovie, those sorts of things. But once they've got the skills, potentially allowing them choice in how they create their work might actually benefit them, as we looked at before in terms of the engagement and motivation through autonomy and choice. Okay, sorry, it was the wrong slide I was showing before. It was this slide I think someone wanted to see, so I'll leave it up on the screen. Share the QR code for online. Yep, I'll show that in just a second. Again, feel free to take a screenshot of these slides if people want to. They'll be useful for you. How would I overcome students with no access to digital technologies or outdated tech? Great question. And again, Welsh Government, and again, I know not everyone on the call is from Wales, and UK-wide there are pots of money as well. First of all, make sure you know that there isn't the technology at home that could be used. So definitely my first point would be survey the parents to find out what is available. That can then mean that you might have access to some of this thing in school. I mean, bear in mind that for the last few months, lots of schools have been closed, not closed in the fact that education hasn't happened, but not all of the students have been in. And there might be some technology that was sitting around that could have been repurposed to support students that didn't have access to certain things. The second thing would be utilize the pots of money that are available. Lots of people talk about, iPads specifically are very expensive and all of that. They really are not that expensive when you utilize the purchasing power of education through them. And then obviously they have a much higher resale value. So again, the resellers, XMA being one of them, can help you with that kind of whole processing thing. And also thinking about how you buy things. The traditional models tend to be we buy the stuff because we've got a pot of money. But actually, when you think about leasing those things, it means that every 3 years you get new tech. So you don't need to worry about the fact that tech is getting outdated, because actually you're spreading out the cost across a longer period of time. It becomes an investment as opposed to a one-off outlay. and then every 3 years you get the latest technology for the same cost. And usually that can be from something around £7 per student per month. And when you then factor in, and we don't have time to go into it here, the savings cost on printing, the saving costs on photocopiers, all of those things. Not to say you don't have them at all, because there's still a purpose for them, but you definitely don't need to print out worksheets all the time because you've changed how you approach teaching. Just some other thanks. That's great. Thanks, people, for joining in. And another question here: how do schools find out what you're saying now? Oh, right. Okay, so the replacement thing. You need to engage with the people that know what they're doing. So this whole kind of refresh thing. XMA are one example. They're on the Welsh framework. If you're here from other parts of the UK, there are lots of other resellers. I will put a link in here to those. Let's copy that and paste that in. So this is a link to the resellers all around the UK that can support you with this, from academia to GBM to XMA as well. I focused on XMA today because obviously they are big in Wales, and this was kind of positioned for Welsh educators. But definitely engage with the resellers because they're the ones that have experience of doing this. For example, here, St Cyrus School, they've partnered with XMA a few years ago. Their one-to-one iPad. They will have fantastic experience, and I'll kind of point out to you then that you can talk to these guys. And Laura's kind of in the chat now at the moment as a member of staff at St Cyrus. XMA have supported them not only with having the devices, but also like the training, the support, the strategic implementation, the technical support behind the scenes of what things to do. And again, this isn't really about whether it's iPad and Microsoft or Google, because like I said, if you're using Google and Microsoft, they're cloud-based solutions and they sit on the hardware. So you just need to think like what hardware works really, really well for us. Okay, I think that's about it, unless there's any more questions. Yeah, Dan, definitely look into leasing. It's definitely the way forward for schools to think about affordability of things. I'm not an expert in that. My field is the how we use the stuff, not how you buy the stuff. But I know that companies, like I said, the reseller companies will all be able to support you with the leasing approaches. There is a pot of money available at the moment. Like I said, if you know that it's iPads you're after because you see the benefit of an iPad over a desktop computer because you want students to be more mobile, there's also the other factor of cleaning things. A nice soft glass screen is a lot easier to clean than a keyboard. That's just my opinion. Definitely talk to the resellers and get some guidance on ways that you can purchase things. But like I said, having spoken to a lot of schools over the last 3 months, moving away from a model of thinking we've got this amount of money in our pot, we can buy this amount of iPads this year, which means that's it, and moving that to a leasing agreement where you spread that out over a longer period of time, and you know that in 3 years' time, yes, the tech will be outdated potentially, but there's a buyback scheme from the resellers. They'll give you money for those devices, and actually what that means is it takes money off the next purchase to refresh things, which means you're not left with out-of-date devices, which I know is a major issue for lots of schools. Okay, great. There are still people here, so if people do have questions, please do chuck them in. I will hang around for another couple of minutes. If you do have questions, you can also unmute yourself if you want to unmute yourself. But if people don't have any more questions, just leave me to say thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I think someone was also asking for the QR code for this, so I'll leave that up on the screen. And like I said, any further questions, please do reach out on Twitter, and I'd be more than happy to engage with you and support and offer some advice if I can. Thank you very much.